People didn't fear Blackwood House because it was abandoned. They feared it because no one ever left it the same. The real estate listing appeared online on a Tuesday morning in March 2019. Detective Sarah Chen still remembers the exact date because it was the same day her daughter turned 7, and she'd been distracted all morning thinking about the birthday party that evening. The listing was unremarkable at first glance. A 3-story Victorian in the Glendale Heights neighborhood, built in 1887, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, original hardwood floors. The price seemed low for the area, but Sarah had learned that older homes often came with expensive surprises hidden behind their charming facades. What caught her attention wasn't the listing itself, but the email from her colleague, Detective Marcus Webb, with the subject line, "Remember this place?" She did remember. Everyone in the department remembered Blackwood House. It started with a welfare check on November 3, 2018, 5 months before that listing would appear. Mrs. Patricia Alvarez, a neighbor, called the non-emergency line to report that she hadn't seen the residents of 1847 Blackwood Lane in over a week. The mail was piling up, she said. The newspapers were still in their plastic sleeves on the front lawn. There were lights on inside at strange hours, always the same lights, never changing. "I know it sounds silly," Mrs. Alvarez told the dispatcher, her voice apologetic. "But Margaret and I have coffee every Thursday morning. We've done it for 3 years. She wouldn't just disappear without telling me." Officer Jason Reeves was assigned to the call. He was 26, fresh-faced, with only 2 years on the force. His dashcam footage from that day would later become evidence, watched and rewatched by investigators trying to piece together what happened inside Blackwood House. The footage shows Reeves pulling up to a stately Victorian, painted in fading burgundy and cream. November had stripped most of the leaves from the oak tree in the front yard, and its branches cast skeletal shadows across the house's facade. Reeves approached the front door, knocked 3 times. No answer. He knocked again, calling out, "Police! Welfare check!" He walked around to the side of the house, peering into windows. The curtains were drawn on most of them. He radioed in. No sign of disturbance, attempting contact at rear entrance. The back door was unlocked. This detail would haunt Reeves for the rest of his career. The door was unlocked, and he stepped inside, calling out as he entered. The house was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock, somewhere in its depths. The kitchen was immaculate, dishes drying in the rack, a vase of flowers on the table, long dead, their petals scattered across the surface like confetti from a funeral. Reeves moved through to the living room. Here, too, everything seemed normal. A book lay open on the coffee table, reading glasses perched beside it. The television remote sat on the arm of a leather chair. But there was a smell, faint but unmistakable to anyone who'd worked a crime scene. Reeves put his hand on his service weapon and moved more cautiously now, calling out again. He found Margaret Hartley in the upstairs bedroom. She was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, dressed in a blue nightgown, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were open, staring out at the oak tree in the front yard. She had been dead for approximately 5 days. Detective Sarah Chen and her partner Marcus Webb arrived at Blackwood House within an hour of Reeves's discovery. By then, the coroner's team was already on scene, and the house had been cordoned off with yellow tape that snapped and fluttered in the November wind. Sarah had been a detective for 8 years. She'd worked homicides, missing persons, cold cases. She'd seen things that would make most people lose sleep. But something about Blackwood House felt different from the moment she crossed the threshold. The medical examiner, Dr. Raymond Price, met them in the foyer. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually worried expression. "Natural causes," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Most likely a cardiac event. She was 73, had a history of heart problems according to the medications we found in the bathroom." "So why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Marcus asked. Dr. Price hesitated. "Come upstairs. There's something I want you to see." They followed him up the sweeping staircase, past walls covered in family photographs. Sarah noted them in passing. Margaret and her husband at their wedding, young and smiling. Margaret holding a baby. The same child at various ages, a teenage boy, a young man in a graduation gown. Always the same three people, frozen in time. The bedroom where Margaret had been found was large, with high ceilings and crown molding. The rocking chair still sat by the window. Dr. Price gestured to the bedside table. "She died in that chair," he said. "But look at this." On the table was a pill bottle, sleeping medication. Next to it was a glass of water, still half full. And beside that was a journal, open to a page filled with Margaret's handwriting. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and carefully lifted the journal. The entry was dated October 29th, 2018, 5 days before Officer Reeves found the body. "He's back. I know Thomas says it's impossible, that I'm imagining things, but I can hear him. Always at night, always the same pattern. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks, then silence. I go downstairs, but there's never anyone there. Thomas thinks I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. But I know what I hear. The boy in the walls is back." "Where's the husband?" Sarah asked, looking up at Dr. Price. "That's the thing," the medical examiner said. "We don't know." Thomas Hartley, age 76, was a retired civil engineer. According to neighbors, he was quiet, kept to himself, spent most of his time working in his woodshop in the basement. The last confirmed sighting of him was on October 31st, Halloween night. Mrs. Alvarez remembered seeing him taking out the trash that evening. He'd waved to her, she said. He seemed normal. After that, nothing. His car was still in the garage. His wallet was on his dresser. His medication bottles were in the bathroom, half full. It was as if he'd simply vanished from inside the house. Sarah and Marcus spent that first day searching Blackwood House from top to bottom. It was a labyrinth of rooms and hallways with odd little spaces tucked into corners. Victorian homes were like that, Sarah knew. Built in an era when closets weren't taxed and servants needed their separate staircases. They found the wood shop in the basement. It was organized and clean, tools hanging neatly on pegboards. A project sat unfinished on the workbench. A jewelry box half-sanded, waiting for its final touches. Sawdust had settled over everything in a fine layer. "He hasn't been down here in weeks," Marcus observed, running his finger through the dust. The basement also contained the furnace room, a laundry area, and a wine cellar. The wine cellar door was locked. Sarah jiggled the handle, then looked at Marcus. "Let's get a key." They found a ring of keys in the kitchen drawer. The third one fit the wine cellar lock. The door swung open with a creak that echoed in the confined space. The cellar was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with brick walls and a stone floor. Wooden racks held bottles covered in dust and cobwebs. But what caught Sarah's attention was the far wall. Or rather, what had been the far wall. Someone had knocked a hole through it. The hole was roughly 3 feet in diameter, irregular, the bricks broken and pushed inward. Sarah pulled out her flashlight and shone it through the opening. Beyond was darkness and the smell of earth and something else. Something old and stale. "That's not supposed to be there," Marcus said unnecessarily. Sarah squeezed through the hole, Marcus following. They found themselves in a narrow space between the foundation of Blackwood House and what must have been the wall of the neighboring property. But no, that wasn't right. The neighboring house was at least 20 feet away. This was something else. This was a room that wasn't supposed to exist. The room beyond the wine cellar was roughly 15 feet long and 8 feet wide. The ceiling was low enough that Marcus had to duck. The walls were bare brick, slick with moisture. In one corner sat a camping lantern, its battery dead. In another corner was a sleeping bag, spread out on a piece of cardboard. And in the center of the room was a chair, and on that chair were ropes, cut cleanly through. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Marcus, we need forensics down here right now." While they waited for the team to arrive, Sarah explored the space more carefully. Someone had been living here, or at least spending significant time here. There were food wrappers in one corner, water bottles, a bucket that had been used as a makeshift toilet. On the wall, scratched into the brick with what must have been a nail or piece of metal, were words, "Let me out, please. I'm sorry. Day 14, day 27, day 40. I can hear her crying. The scratches went on, numbers climbing higher. Day 55, day 72, day 103. The final number was day 129. Jesus, Marcus breathed. Someone was kept prisoner down here for over 4 months. But who, and by whom? The forensics team arrived and began processing the scene. Sarah and Marcus went back upstairs, both needing fresh air and time to think. In the kitchen, Sarah made coffee while Marcus pulled out his notebook. "The journal entry," Sarah said. "Margaret mentioned the boy in the walls. Could there be more hidden spaces in this house?" They spent the rest of the afternoon tapping on walls, looking for hollow spaces, checking for inconsistencies in the floor plan. Old Victorian homes often had modifications over the years, additions built, rooms repurposed. But Blackwood House seemed to have an unusual number of anomalies. In the second-floor hallway, Marcus found a door that had been wallpapered over. They carefully cut away the paper and found themselves staring at a narrow staircase leading up. "Third floor should just be an attic," Marcus said. "Should be," Sarah agreed. They climbed the stairs, flashlights cutting through the dusty air. At the top was a landing and 3 doors. The doors had locks on the outside. Heavy industrial locks, the kind you'd find on a storage unit. Sarah's heart was hammering now. "Marcus, call for backup. We need more people here." The first door opened into what had clearly been a child's bedroom. A twin bed with a metal frame, a small dresser. The walls were covered in crayon drawings, the kind a young child would make. Stick figures, a house, a family. In one corner, someone had written in crayon over and over, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." The second door revealed a bathroom, small and basic. Toilet, sink, shower. No window. The third door was locked from the inside. Sarah knocked. "Police, if anyone is in there, please respond." Silence. Marcus handed her a crowbar from his kit. "Do it." Sarah wedged the crowbar into the doorframe and pried. The lock was old but stubborn. It took several attempts before the wood splintered and the door swung open. Thomas Hartley was inside. He was sitting on a bed, his back against the wall, his hands resting on his knees. He was gaunt, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd been seen in on Halloween night. But his eyes were what struck Sarah the most. They were empty, staring at nothing, reflecting nothing. "Mr. Hartley?" Sarah approached slowly, hands visible. "I'm Detective Chen. We're here to help you. You're safe now." Thomas didn't respond. He didn't even seem to register their presence. Marcus radioed for an ambulance while Sarah did a quick assessment. Thomas was breathing, had a pulse, but was completely unresponsive, catatonic. While they waited for the paramedics, Sarah looked around the room. Like the child's bedroom, it was sparse, but on the small desk against the wall was a notebook. Sarah opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, deteriorating as the entries progressed. November 1st, 2018. She locked me in. I don't understand. Margaret locked me in. She said it was for my own good. She said, I need to remember. Remember what? What did I do? November 5th, 2018. Still locked in. She brings me food once a day. Won't speak to me. Won't explain. I can hear her talking to someone at night, but when I call out, she doesn't answer. There's no one else in the house. Who is she talking to? November 10th, 2018. I remembered today. God help me, I remembered. The boy in the walls. She knows I remembered. That's why she locked me in here. She knows what I did. The entries continued, becoming more disjointed, more desperate. The final entry was dated November 15th, 2018. I hear him crying. Not Margaret. Him, the boy. He's still here, after all these years, still here in the walls. Margaret was right. You can't escape what you've done. You can only wait for it to find you. The case exploded into a media sensation within 24 hours. A woman dead of natural causes, while her husband was imprisoned in a secret room. A hidden chamber in the basement. Evidence of someone being held captive for months. And cryptic references to the boy in the walls. Sarah barely slept for the next week. They brought in structural engineers to survey Blackwood House, checking for more hidden spaces. They found 4 more. 2 were empty, obviously unused for decades. 1 contained old furniture covered in sheets. The 4th contained something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was behind the kitchen, accessible only through a crawl space in the basement. Inside was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. The walls were covered in children's drawings, decades old, the paper yellowed and brittle. And in the corner was a pile of clothes, child-sized clothes, and bones. The forensic anthropologist determined they belonged to a boy, approximately 8 to 10 years old. He'd been dead for at least 30 years, possibly longer. The skeleton showed evidence of malnutrition and 1 healed fracture of the left arm. Sarah pulled the property records for Blackwood House. Thomas and Margaret Hartley had purchased the house in 1972. Before that, it had belonged to Margaret's parents, the Blackwoods. Margaret had grown up in that house. The clothes found with the remains were from the 1960s. Sarah tracked down everyone she could find who had known the Blackwood family. Most were dead or suffering from dementia. But she finally found a woman named Helen Kowalski, who had lived next door to the Blackwoods from 1960 to 1968. Oh, I remember the Blackwoods, Helen said, when Sarah visited her in the nursing home. She was 92, but her mind was sharp. They were private people, very private. They had Margaret, of course, sweet girl, very quiet. And they had, well, there were rumors about a son. Rumors? Sarah pressed. Helen's eyes grew distant. No one ever saw him. At least I never did. But sometimes you'd hear him, crying mostly, late at night. I asked Mrs. Blackwood about it once, and she said I must have been mistaken, said they only had Margaret. But I know what I heard. Did you ever report it? Helen shook her head, shame crossing her face. Things were different then. You didn't interfere in other people's business. You didn't question. I've regretted it every day since. Sarah obtained a warrant to exhume the bodies of Margaret's parents from the cemetery. DNA testing confirmed that the bones found in Blackwood House belonged to their son, Margaret's brother. His name, according to a birth certificate Sarah finally located in state archives, was Daniel Blackwood. There was no death certificate on file. Thomas Hartley was transferred to a psychiatric facility. For 2 weeks, he remained catatonic, unresponsive to treatment. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, he began to speak. Sarah was called in to take his statement. She sat across from Thomas in a quiet room, a recorder between them, and listened as he told a story that had been buried for more than 50 years. Margaret never talked about her brother, Thomas began, his voice hoarse from disuse. In all our years together, she never mentioned him. I found out by accident in 1989. We were doing renovations, updating the electrical system, and the electrician found the room behind the kitchen. Found the bones. What did you do? Sarah asked gently. Margaret broke down. She told me everything. Thomas's hands shook as he spoke. Her brother Daniel was born different. That's what her mother told her. He was slow to develop, had fits, couldn't be controlled. This was the 1950s. There weren't support systems for children like Daniel. Families were ashamed. Her parents' solution was to hide him. They built that room and put him in there. Margaret was 5 years old. She grew up hearing her brother crying in the walls. Sarah felt sick, but kept her expression neutral. How did he die? Neglect mostly. Margaret said her mother would sometimes forget to feed him, or forget for days at a time. One day when Margaret was 13, the crying just stopped. Her parents didn't tell her what happened. They just sealed up the room and never spoke of it again. And you kept this secret for 30 years? Thomas closed his eyes. Margaret begged me. She said it would destroy her if anyone found out, that people would think she was responsible, that she was as guilty as her parents. I loved her. So I kept quiet. We sealed the room back up, finished the renovations, and never spoke of it again. But something changed, Sarah said. You broke through the wall in the wine cellar. You created that hidden room. Thomas opened his eyes, and Sarah saw tears streaming down his face. Margaret started having nightmares, hearing things. She became convinced that Daniel was still there, still suffering. She became obsessed with the idea that we needed to be punished, that I needed to understand what Daniel went through. She imprisoned you. At first, it was only for hours. She'd lock me in the basement room and leave me there. Said I needed to feel what her brother felt. Then it became days. I tried to escape, broke through the wine cellar wall, thinking I could get out that way. But the room I found just led to another wall. I was trapped. And Margaret, his voice broke. Margaret would come down and talk to me through the door. But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to Daniel. She'd say, "I'm sorry, Danny. I'm so sorry I didn't help you." What about the room on the 3rd floor, where we found you? That was later. Margaret had gotten worse. She moved me up there, said it was closer to where Daniel's room had been, said I needed to be there to understand. She'd bring me food once a day, water. She'd sit outside the door and read children's books aloud. Books she said she used to read to Daniel through his door when she was a child. Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. She was trying to save him, trying to go back in time and save her brother. But she couldn't, so she was using me instead. And then she got sick. I heard her collapsing in the hallway, heard her go into her bedroom. After that, nothing. I called out for days. No one came. I thought I was going to die in that room too. Margaret Hartley's journal filled in the remaining gaps. Sarah read through months of entries, watching as a woman's guilt and grief slowly drove her into madness. August 12th, 2018. I dreamed of Danny again last night. He was standing in the hallway, looking at me with those sad eyes. He didn't say anything. He never does. But I know what he wants. He wants me to remember. He wants someone to pay for what was done to him. September 3rd, 2018. Thomas doesn't understand. He thinks we can just forget, just move on. But Danny is still here. I hear him crying at night. He's been crying for 60 years, and no one came to help him. No one except me, and I was just a child. What could I have done? October 1st, 2018. I know what I have to do now. Thomas has to understand what Danny went through. He has to feel it. Only then will Danny be able to rest. Only then will the crying stop. The final entry was dated October 30th, 2018, the day before Thomas was last seen outside the house. Tomorrow I'll do it. Tomorrow Thomas will understand. And maybe finally Danny will forgive me. The case was never prosecuted. Margaret was dead, and Thomas was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial for his role in concealing Daniel's death. He remained in psychiatric care, reportedly improving slowly, but never quite returning to the man he'd been before. The bones of Daniel Blackwood were given a proper burial in a quiet ceremony, attended by Sarah, Marcus, and a handful of others who felt someone should bear witness. A small headstone was placed. Daniel Blackwood, 1953-1966. May you finally rest in peace. Blackwood House was eventually sold to a developer who planned to tear it down and build condominiums. Sarah got a call from the foreman 3 weeks into demolition. Detective Chen, you're going to want to see this. She drove to Glendale Heights, where Blackwood House stood half demolished, its insides exposed to the world like an anatomical diagram. The foreman led her to what had been the second floor. We found another space, he said, behind the master bedroom. We weren't even looking for it, but when we pulled down the wall, it was smaller than the others, just a closet-sized space, really. But the walls were covered in writing, a child's handwriting, scratched into the plaster with what must have been fingernails. I'm sorry, please, Mommy. I'm hungry. It hurts. Please, is anyone there? And then, in larger letters, written over and over, Maggie, help me. Maggie, help me. Maggie, help me. Sarah stood in front of that wall for a long time. She thought about Margaret, 5 years old, hearing her brother's cries. She thought about the weight of that guilt, carried for an entire lifetime. She thought about Thomas, trapped in those rooms, paying for sins that weren't his own. She thought about how houses hold secrets, and how sometimes those secrets reshape the people who live in them, twisting them into something unrecognizable. Before she left, Sarah took photographs of the wall. She didn't know why, maybe as evidence, though there was no trial to present it at. Maybe as a memorial, proof that Daniel Blackwood had existed, had suffered, had cried out for help that never came. Or maybe as a reminder that some stories don't have clean endings. Some horrors don't come with explanations that make sense or justice that feels adequate. The last wall came down on a Thursday. Sarah wasn't there to see it, but Mrs. Alvarez was, standing on her lawn, watching as the house that had stood for 132 years was reduced to rubble and memories. Later, she told a reporter that as the final wall fell, she could have sworn she heard something. A child's voice, she said, just for a moment, not crying anymore, laughing. But that was probably just the wind. Sarah stood in her kitchen, coffee growing cold in her mug, staring at the real estate listing on her phone. The lot where Blackwood House had stood was now listed for sale. Prime development opportunity, the description read. Historic Glendale Heights location. There was no mention of what had stood there before, no mention of the secrets buried in its walls or the lives destroyed within its rooms. She thought about calling Marcus, then decided against it. He'd moved to a different division, told her he needed a change. She understood. Some cases stayed with you, changed you in ways you couldn't quite articulate. Sarah closed the listing and poured her coffee down the sink. She had a meeting with a therapist in an hour. Her captain had suggested it, gently but firmly, after Sarah had spent 3 nights in a row sleeping at her desk rather than going home to her own house. As she grabbed her keys, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you for finding me." Sarah stared at the message, her hands suddenly cold. There was no way to trace where it had come from. She tried calling the number back. Disconnected. She told herself it was a wrong number, a cruel prank, a glitch. She told herself a lot of things as she drove to her appointment, as she sat in the therapist's office, as she went home that night, to her own house with its ordinary walls and ordinary rooms, and no secrets hidden in its foundations. But sometimes, late at night, she would wake up and think she heard something. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks, then silence. And she would lie there in the dark, remembering Blackwood House, and wonder what other secrets were hidden in the walls of old homes across the city. What other voices were crying out, unheard? What other children were waiting, even now, for someone to find them? The case was closed. The house was gone. The dead were buried. But Sarah Chen knew better than most that some stories don't end just because you want them to. Some stories wait in the walls, patient as the bones they keep company with, whispering to whoever will listen. "I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here."